Everyone at the party turned to stare as she walked in wearing a plain dress, hair tied back, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. Among the glittering gowns, designer suits, and flashing cameras, she stood out not in the way people dream of, but in the way that makes whispers follow you through a crowd. People smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Some didn't bother hiding their laughter. She wasn't supposed to be there, not at a party like this. She was just a simple woman, a mother, someone they thought didn't belong. She stayed quiet, her eyes searching the room for just one familiar face. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse, standing near the wall, trying not to take up too much space. The others sipped champagne and talked about business deals, fashion labels, and expensive vacations. No one asked her name. No one cared who she was. But what they didn't know was she hadn't come alone. Her son had invited her, a rising star, someone who had earned his place on that grand stage tonight. He'd always said she was the reason he made it, her sacrifices, her quiet strength. But now, as she stood in the corner, ignored and judged, even he hadn't shown up to greet her. The laughter got louder. Someone even asked, loud enough for others to hear, "Whose maid is that?" The room erupted in giggles. Still, she didn't leave. She waited, holding back tears, holding on to the memory of her son's promise, and then the lights dimmed. The host tapped the microphone. The next guest of honor was about to be introduced. A hush fell over the crowd. From behind the curtains, her son stepped out, and what he said next didn't just silence the room. It changed everything. But before he could finish, someone from the crowd stood up, and what happened next? No one saw coming. The room went completely silent as he walked onto the stage, tall and confident under the spotlight. Dressed in a sleek black suit, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand, he looked every bit the man people had come to celebrate. The audience leaned in, waiting for the usual list of thank yous, the polished speech, the proud mentions of mentors and supporters. But his eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on her, his mother, still standing near the wall, still trying to disappear. Something shifted in his expression. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but low. "Before I begin," he said, "I need to talk about someone no one here seems to notice." A few confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, unsure where he was going. Cameras started rolling. Influencers in the front row raised their phones, expecting drama, maybe a surprise shout-out. But no one expected what he said next. "She's not wearing diamonds. She didn't come in a fancy car. She's not here to impress anyone," he said, pointing gently in her direction. "But without her, none of this would exist. Not this night, not my career, not me." Somewhere near the back, a woman whispered, "Wait, is that his mother?" The mood in the room started to shift, tension rising like heat. People were sitting straighter now, eyes wide, suddenly realizing they had judged someone far too quickly. But just as the room seemed to settle into his words, someone stood up near the front, a woman in a shimmering gold dress, expression tight and cold. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting. "We all have families. That doesn't mean we bring strangers to an elite event." Gasps echoed across the hall. The spotlight flickered slightly. He looked at the woman who spoke, then back at his mother. The crowd waited, breathless, wondering how he'd respond and if he'd still tell the truth he came to share. But what he did next didn't just surprise everyone. It changed the entire meaning of the night. He looked directly at the woman in the gold dress, his jaw tightening just a little. He knew her. Most people in the room did. She was one of the event organizers, someone powerful in those circles, used to being admired, listened to. She flashed him a tight smile, as if daring him to challenge her. His fingers curled slightly around the paper in his hand, but he didn't read from it. Instead, he stepped forward. "You're right," he said slowly. "This is an elite event. But what makes it elite? Expensive suits? Fancy last names? Or is it the people behind the scenes, the ones who clean the tables, watch our kids, hold our families together so we can stand here looking important?" The tension in the room thickened. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked down, pretending not to notice his mother, who was still standing quietly, her eyes fixed on her son. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. Every word cut through the silence. "Do you know what she used to do?" he asked, glancing back at his mother. "She scrubbed hotel floors after midnight so I could stay in school. She skipped meals to buy my textbooks. She came home every day with aching feet and still helped me practice for interviews. So no, she's not a stranger. She's the reason I'm here." A pause followed, but no applause. Just a thick, unspoken weight hanging in the air. He wasn't finished. Across the room, another subplot was quietly unfolding. A man near the bar, one of the sponsors, was watching with narrowed eyes. He recognized her too. Years ago, she had worked for his family. Fired unfairly after a mistake. That wasn't hers. His jaw tightened, old guilt rising. Meanwhile, another guest whispered to her friend, "I thought she looked familiar. I think she used to clean the building my office is in." The room wasn't just hearing a speech anymore, they were being forced to remember, to see. And yet, no one moved. The woman in gold crossed her arms. The mother still hadn't spoken. And her son still had more to say. The room was still to still. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clink of a dropped fork. His mother stood motionless, her eyes glistening now, but her expression calm. She hadn't moved from that corner since she arrived. Her son hadn't taken his eyes off her since he started speaking. Everyone else was just background noise to him now. The woman in gold, the judgmental stares, the whispers, they didn't matter. Not anymore, but behind the stillness, the pressure was rising. People were shifting in their seats, unsure whether to support him or stay silent. A few nodded slowly. Some looked away. The man near the bar still hadn't moved, but his grip on his glass had tightened. Regret showed clearly on his face now. And yet, no one stood up for her. No one spoke. "I know some of you are uncomfortable," her son said, voice steady but sharper now. "It's easier to praise success than to recognize the pain behind it. It's easier to applaud the winners than to ask how they got here and who helped them along the way." He walked to the edge of the stage, closer to the guests. "We dress up tonight and act like we've made it on our own. But that's a lie. My mother didn't wear a gown tonight, but she wore courage every single day of her life." His voice dropped, softer now. "And you laughed at her." A ripple of guilt passed through the crowd. One woman looked down at her lap. Another man swallowed hard, shifting his eyes away. The woman in gold still stood tall, but her expression had changed. Less smug, more careful. He turned to his mother, his voice cracking just slightly. "I invited her because I wanted her to feel proud, not pitied, not mocked." Then he paused, breathing in deeply, like he was holding something back, something heavy, and just as he opened his mouth to continue, the man at the bar stepped forward, clearing his throat. All eyes turned to him, and in that moment, everything hung in the balance. The man at the bar cleared his throat again, louder this time, and the room turned toward him like a wave. He took a few slow steps forward, the spotlight catching his face just enough for people to recognize him. Mr. Langford, one of the biggest donors of the evening, a man known for his wealth, his connections, and his influence. The tension in the air thickened even more. Everyone was waiting for him to say something to smooth things over or maybe defend the crowd. But instead, what he said caught everyone off guard. "She worked for me," he said plainly, eyes locked on the mother, standing at the back of the room. "Years ago." Gasps spread like sparks. He continued, voice low but firm. "And I fired her for something she didn't do. I knew it then. I know it now." Her son froze on stage, visibly stunned. Even his mother blinked, surprised. The crowd had gone from curious to silent to something deeper, uneasy. Mr. Langford looked around, then added, "It was easier to blame someone invisible, someone quiet, someone no one would defend." For a moment, it felt like the room stopped breathing. The woman in gold slowly sat down, her face pale. This wasn't just a touching story anymore. This was becoming uncomfortable truth. Public truth. Then came the second twist. Mr. Langford turned to the son. Your mother wasn't just wronged. She's part of the reason I'm standing here tonight too. After I let her go, I found one of her notes left behind. She had been tutoring her son at night using the back of her payslips. That note sat on my desk for months, and it changed how I saw everything, including how I raised my own kids. He paused. I owe her more than an apology. The crowd was no longer just watching a speech, they were witnessing something raw, something real. But just as people began to process his confession, a voice from the back called out, "It wasn't the mother. It wasn't the son. It was someone no one expected, and they weren't coming forward to apologize." Heads turned sharply as the voice from the back rang out. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, confident, well-dressed, and clearly emotional. Her name was Mrs. Keller, another guest at the event, and someone no one expected to speak. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the floor like a drumbeat building to something no one could quite name. I remember her too, she said, looking toward the mother. I was one of the people who laughed. Years ago, when she worked in our building, I looked right past her, never once asked her name. But one day, I found my daughter crying in the hallway. Your mother didn't walk away, she sat with her, spoke to her gently, and listened when no one else did. I never thanked her. The mother's eyes widened. She didn't seem to recognize Mrs. Keller, but that only made the moment more powerful. Her presence, the kindness she gave without expecting anything, had left a mark in more places than she knew. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. The judgment had faded, replaced by something heavier: respect, guilt, and awe. The son stepped down from the stage and walked straight to his mother, took her hand, and helped her to the front. The spotlight shifted. For the first time all night, she stood not in the corner but in the center, and then came the final twist. As the applause began to build, slow, uncertain, but growing, the event's host stepped back up to the mic, clearly flustered. Before we continue, we've just been informed that tonight's award recipient has decided to step aside. He has requested the honor be given to someone else. Gasps spread again. The son turned to his mother and gently placed the plaque in her hands. The audience rose, but just before the lights dimmed, another guest leaned toward Mrs. Keller and whispered, "Did you hear? She was once a teacher. A good one. Lost everything after her husband died. She never said a word." And that's when people truly understood she hadn't just survived, she had quietly changed lives. The applause didn't stop. It rolled through the room like a quiet wave, one that wasn't forced or polite, but real. The kind that came when people finally saw someone they had ignored for too long. She stood there, still holding the plaque, her hands shaking just slightly. Her son stood beside her, no longer needing to say anything. His truth had already been spoken, and it had done more than defend her. It had revealed her. Later that evening, people approached her not with pity, but with genuine respect. They asked her name. They told her how moved they were. Some even apologized, not for anything specific, but for years of looking through people like her. Mr. Langford offered her a quiet, sincere apology before leaving, and even asked if he could help support a cause of her choosing. She simply smiled and told him, "Support kids like my son." "That's enough." Mrs. Keller offered to connect her with an organization for retired educators. "You still have so much to give," she said. The mother didn't say yes or no. She just nodded, her heart full in a way it hadn't been for years. That night, as the party faded and the glitter of the event slowly dimmed, the real spotlight had already moved. It was no longer about the stage, the awards, or the prestige. It was about one simple woman whose quiet strength had shaped the future without asking for thanks, without ever seeking attention. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, her son offered her his arm. She looked up at him and whispered, "I was so afraid you'd be ashamed of me." He smiled, eyes full. "I was never more proud of anything in my life." And with that, they walked away not as guests who barely belonged, but as the ones everyone would remember, not for what they wore or how much they owned, but for the reminder they left behind, that true worth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's humble, and sometimes it walks into a room and changes everything.